And I think we can start with a very quick presentation of Tina Ringenson for those who don't know her already. So you are a postdoctoral researcher at Uppsala Smart Energy Research Group at Uppsala University, obviously. And I think something interesting to say would be that you are interested in the relationship between humans, urban environments, and digital technologies, and how to support sustainability in their interactions now, as well as in a possibly more unstable future, which should be underlined, I think, today. So the floor is yours, and have a good talk.
Thank you. Is there a, yes, yeah. I don't need to point, I just need to, yeah, now we get spoilers. Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. I know it can be difficult to stay awake after lunch, but I'm going to do my best to send energy out into the room. And I thought that I should talk a little bit about, I mean, a lot of you here are PhD students, so I thought I should talk a little bit about sort of my own PhD journey that involved a lot of sort of re-investigation about of my perceptions of digitalization, etc. And also, I will talk a little bit about the Anthropocene because it's in the program, but I don't know if all of you know what it is. And yeah. So this is a picture that is a pretty common type of picture when you search online for smart cities and smart sustainable cities, because that was the field that I got into when I started my PhD about 6 years ago now. Yeah, I finished a year and a half ago, so yeah. And it's very fluffy, and I will get back to that. It's kind of difficult to understand. What does this really mean? So my idea when I started my PhD about smart sustainable cities was that I would be able to, together with my supervisor, write a handbook, a clear step-by-step handbook on how to invest as a municipality or a city in smart technology for environmental sustainability. And I wanted to start by looking at some best practices, both in terms of strategies and in terms of actual investment and building and so on. But the more I looked, the more confused I became. I realized that these words, smart and sustainable, were extremely entangled in each other and very unclear, a little bit like this type of picture. It was difficult to understand if smart was supposed to mean digital, ICT connected, or just anything that's clever when well thought out. It was often assumed to contain some kind of sustainability, but it was difficult to understand what that was or if it was evaluated in any way. And more than so, I thought about the word smart in relation to the word good, for example. Like the word good is, it sounds a little bit irrational. It sounds a bit emotional. You think about a good person, who is that? But smart is obviously rational. It's desirable no matter your like political view, etc. So how can smart be bad? How can it even be evaluated? It's obvious that if something is smart, it should be desirable and it should solve your problems. So I looked at different plans and different implementations, and I found some. I'm not going to like go that much into the technologies that I found because I think you have probably heard of them. It's like solar maps and stuff like that. But what I thought about was that none of them really addressed, for example, consumption, or any of the possible negative effects that we could get from digitalization and ICT investment. So the handbook that we eventually finished didn't really, it did have some like examples of good practices, but most of what it said was just, you have to think about what you are actually investing in and why. And you have to evaluate what happens with those investments before you just push more money into projects like this. Because, as we have already talked a little bit about this morning, there is often a view of our resources that are needed for digitalization as endless riches. We have a view of, this is a cornucopia belonging to the Roman goddess Abundantia. It's a symbol of ever-flowing growth and endless riches. And it characterizes a lot of the discussions about both digitalization and about our economy and our communities and our cities as something that will continuously grow without problems. Maybe we will have to think a little bit about efficiency to make sure that it doesn't grow too much out of control, but it will, without a doubt, it should and it must continuously grow. And this goes for both ICT, our economy, our lifestyles, travel, consumptions. You maybe make it more efficient, but then you have more of it. Which brings me into what I started to do next. I looked at mobility as a service, a particular type of digital implementation for cities. The idea of mobility as a service is that you should be able to go anywhere you want, as flexible you want, without owning a car, which is a good idea, I guess, in a lot of ways, especially if you live somewhere that is like very underserved in terms of transport. But what we wanted to look at in our project was how can we use this without just adding more? Like, how can we use a digital system where you can plan, you can buy your trips, and you can have a lot of different modes, and you can have access very quickly and cheap in a way that doesn't just mean that we travel a lot more, because maybe some of you feel positively about this, but what we found in our research was that, for example, adding electric scooters that just stand around and that you can jump on at any time, which was often considered a mobility service, didn't really end up solving that many sustainability problems in our cities. Theoretically, they can solve like last mile problems. But in practice, they end up very often just everywhere on our streets and just clog the sidewalks and bicycle lanes and so on. And the same was for a lot of other things that was often included in mobility services like Uber, that was at that time newer than it is today, obviously, because this was like 4 years ago, was something that a lot of people hoped would keep people from buying cars, but often ended up replacing walking to the bus stop, waiting for the bus for like 15 minutes, and then taking a bus ride because it's more convenient with an Uber. And there was like, yeah. So our idea was, how can we make this in a way that really kind of, instead of adding more trips to places that already have enough mobility, that are not underserved. How can we make them without just adding more? I can say that to begin with, like most of my research is on globally rich people, such as myself, and I would say probably most of you in this room, just to kind of get a framing for this. So we did a so-called living lab where we asked people to pay for, we did this whole math thing with money and made people kind of pay for their cars, not as a fixed cost and then just for their fuel, but like pay for it as if it was a carpool. And we gave them money for bicycling, and we made it cheaper for them to go on public transport off peak, which a lot of people already have in the world. But it just turned out that they didn't really use it. We tracked all of their travels. And the best thing they thought was to be able to delete the application that tracked their travels. And even when they saw how expensive their car rides were, they didn't really see sharing a car at the end of the day as a possible solution for them. So that was a bit of a bummer. Then we did another experiment. This was pre-COVID, and we set up a work hub where people could go to work outside of the home, but not in their office. And that is really what this, we had this idea that this living lab would consist of a lot of different things. It would have like a travel planner, and it would have e-bicycles, and it would have like a car sharing system. But as soon as this like physical space came up, that became the living lab. And as soon as the people that were in it figured out that they didn't need to use the application because there was usually a desk available, they stopped using the application. And what happened was that I started to really question the idea of mobility as a service, as something that would, you know, that would be flexible, that would really bring change without bringing more car travel. Because what happened here as well was that they used public transport less, which is not very strange because they skipped out on their commute, but they used bicycling and walking more, which was very good, but they also used their car more, which was not very good because this was closer to their home and they were more accustomed, they didn't have like a setup for public transport to that place. I'm just going to say something about this. I'm currently working with electricity. And what I'm trying to do is to make people understand that electricity is not that different from the transport system, because we have a limited possibility of flow in our electricity system, but it's not always about like, is there enough electricity being produced, but also can it actually get to me at the time that I want it? And it has to do with these things. The cloud that actually looks like this. We have already talked about this, so I'm not going to go that much into it. Yeah, as we talked about this morning, this looks like this, and the electronics that we use require energy, they end up like this. they require resources that we don't see. And how does this connect with the Anthropocene? The Anthropocene is often especially connected with the climate. We hear it a lot with talk about the climate. I am a little bit against the sort of shift from environmentalism to just climate for a lot of reasons. But my point, but I'm still going to show you some carbon dioxide pictures later. But the idea of the Anthropocene is that it's not a very given term. It's there are a lot of conflicts about it, but we are currently living in the so-called Holocene. If you don't, whereof the Anthropocene may be like the next step, you can say. So the Holocene started 11,700 years ago when the last ice age ended, and it has been a time of mild and relatively predictable climate that has enabled humans to work with agriculture as a way to get our food and to really bloom, you can say, but also to completely destroy our Earth. And it's this kind of destruction or complete rearrangement of the natural system that many refer to as the Anthropocene. And then there are like some geologists that are very skeptical of that use, and they are like, oh, but it's not going to be as long that it can actually count as an epoch and so on. But what I think is a more relevant questioning of this is, yeah, this kind of shows the shocking amount of carbon dioxide of our atmosphere over time. But what I think is the most interesting about it is that when you say it's the Anthropocene, it sounds like it's all humans. It sounds like it's the human race overall. But it kind of, I mean, in a way, it sort of is, but it's very clear who are the most responsible for this. And I am not, it's, you know, the richest 5% have a much, much larger impact on the growth in carbon dioxide during, like from the 1990 and until 2015. And whether or not this should lead to like a world revolution, that's up to you. That's not my point. But rather that if only the richest of the world are, not only, but if mainly the richest of the world are responsible for this, and even if we include the 10% richest, you have like a decline, but it's still much bigger than everyone else. And this is per EU income group. And it's interesting because like in 2015, to belong to the richest 10% in the EU, you only needed to earn, let's see, I have the number here, 41,000 euros per year. So it's not that high to be in the richest 10% of Europe. But what I think is the most interesting thing about this is not whether we should get rid of billionaires, maybe we should, but rather that the majority of people on this earth are actually living in a way that doesn't have as big an impact as the people that I have worked with in living labs that are insistent that their lives will never be able to change, and that the cities that we live in will never be able to change, and that everything will just continue to be faster and more, and more traffic and more consumption and more money. But if it's not everyone on Earth that lives like that, doesn't that mean that it's not impossible to live like that? Of course, like, I respect that it's a privilege, but I also, and we should get rid of extreme poverty, but it's really clear that the constant growth has led to some extremities that are not representative for what humans as a species really need. So if we accept that there are some conflicts between the positive possibilities of implementing digital technologies and the possible negative impacts of it, we end up with kind of like a catch-22. We want to understand effects before we invest, but we have a lack of data, so we can't really know. We have to do research on it. And we need to figure out what we really want, both what we want to install and what we want to create to be able to reduce the harm that we are doing in our societies right now, but also what types of lives and what kind of development we want. Because as humans, we can choose our development. We can choose the development of our digital technologies, as well as how we want our economies to look. It's like having more digital technology and everything going faster all the time and having constantly more money is not it's not by natural force. It's a choice that we make to invest. What I try to think about when I think about what to do with my research for the future, I have been using this image by a wonderful marine biologist and activist called Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. She developed this to figure out what one's climate action should be. But I think you can use it for a lot of things that are relevant. Thinking about what brings you joy, what you look forward to doing, what are you good at, and what needs to be done. And these are probably things that we need to reinvestigate throughout our lives. And I have decided that for now, I think that my action should be in the field of research and teaching. But exactly what I should do research on, I'm still kind of trying to figure out. I think what I'm doing right now is valuable, but I also think that we need to do a lot more to think about where we are really going. I actually, I skipped a lot of slides to make them much shorter because I thought I would be short of time, but now I actually have some extra time. I have 10 more minutes, 5 minutes. Yeah, but maybe I should just open up for questions and discussion at once. Yeah, I think so, because yes.
So when you have a question, please speak in the mic such that for the stream and the video, we can keep it. So, yeah.
have a question about the emissions of CO2 by per capita, because I was surprised about the fact that except the richest 1%, the emissions were decreasing in Europe. And I wanted to ask, would this take in account the exported emissions?
That's a really good question. I am actually not 100% sure. Do you want me to check it now, or can we check it later?
As you want.
Yeah, but I was also surprised by that. I guess it has to do with like travel and stuff like that, but I am unsure about the consumption when you consume things from other countries, for example.
Thank you for the great talk. I was wondering, so you explained that this mobility as a service did not work out that well in the living lab as you tried it. But why not? Why, if you, what made them choose for cars, even though it was in the system you implemented more expensive than, for instance, taking public transport? Was it the flexibility, or were there other reasons that made them still go back to the car?
I think there were probably a number of different reasons. Like the idea of mobility as a service is that you should have a carpool, but it should always be available. And when we started to interview people, we kind of, and also look into other research that other people had done on carpooling, we learned that as soon as you have a car, you tend to use it a lot more. And when you have a carpool, carpool not as in like we as ride sharing, but like a lot of people owning a car together, or you have some kind of subscription. Car travel goes down, but it's partially because it's not as convenient anymore to take the car. So when we made the car as, like when we made a carpool as convenient as their own car, and actually in practice, this was their own car. They were just paying for it as if it was a carpool, because that was the only way that we could make it 100% accessible. It just didn't, yeah, it just didn't work. And a lot of the time, like we didn't raise the price. We just, so to explain this math thing, what we did was when you have a car, you have fixed costs. You have bought the car, but you also often you need to like pay off some kind of loan every month. You have to pay for parking, etc. And then you have additional costs that are like taxes and like fuel and so on. And what we did was that we took kind of like a baseline of their fixed cost, and we made that part of like a flexible cost. And a mistake that we did, I think, was we wanted to focus on the type of travel that we thought would be relevant for mobility as a service, which we thought about like as the kind of small travel or small-ish travel that you do within your urban area. And it turned out that for most of these participants, the majority of their travel was actually specific long trips that they did during their vacation. And often it was kind of like their main motivation that they really needed to own the car was that they did these long trips during the summer. But then when they had the car, they could just as well use it all the time, sort of. So there is this kind of interrelationship where if you own a car, you use it more, and you feel that you need a car, so you buy it, and then you have it, so then you use it, and then you build your life on the assumption that you will have access to your car. So you build like a habit of going with your car to do shopping, and like maybe your kid goes to ice hockey somewhere where you need to take the car and so on. While if you don't have a car, you can't do that. So you just don't do it. Yeah.
So would it be like you develop habits that you would only develop if you have a car, and then you maintain them even if you have another system?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know, like if these people, if we had really taken their cars from them and placed other cars somewhere that they had to book, maybe it would have been different. I don't know. But yeah, that was what happened. And a lot of them also were surprised how cheap it was to, like some felt that it was expensive, but others were like, oh, it's only that much, that's fine. So yeah.
Maybe something to add to pick up on this, but first I would like to know if anyone else would like to raise a question or so. No, no, that's fine. I will come back to this afterwards.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, since digitalization and smart cities are sort of the default, they are seen as good by politicians, it seems to me, and there are lots of investments about this. And so since you said your PhD manuscript in the end was a handbook about whether it's good or it's a bad thing, did you manage to reach other spheres of the society rather than academia alone?
Yeah, so I should clarify that my own PhD thesis was not the same as the handbook. The handbook was an outcome of the project that I did the first part of my PhD in. But yeah, so that is a good question. I presented it at a large conference with a lot of municipality public servants. That's the word, right? Yeah. And they were like, wow, we've never thought about it this way. So at least they liked it, but I'm not sure how well implemented it has actually been. Because we did it largely in cooperation with two municipalities in the Stockholm region. And at least one of them just got angry. He was like, we don't have time for this. We need to invest. We can't be like you researchers and sit around for like a year and try to figure out if it's worth it or not. Like, okay. Yeah.
Just what did you answer to that point?
I can't remember. I think I just looked defeated.
Okay. Anyone else with a question? Yeah, great.
I just have a question about this image behind you.
Yeah.
What's this? Is this what you think of as sort of a climate activist, or is this your professional self? The work, you know, if you're an activist, you also work with things, but you know, what work needs doing, is that your research, or is that, like, is this about research, or is this about activism?
Oh, yeah. So this was developed for figuring out what to do as not necessarily an activist, but what your contribution should be. If you think that we are going in the wrong direction and we need to do something about it, I think this is for figuring out what your role can be in that transformation. So for me, for example, I would not consider myself an activist at this point. But I think that I have chosen instead to try to contribute to a possible transformation or some kind of positive change through my research and my work instead, you can say. And part of that has to do with, you know, what are you good at and what brings you joy. I just don't feel like doing activism. It feels, I really respect like activism, and I'm really proud of, like, for example, my mother, who is super involved in like Extinction Rebellion, and I have friends who are also doing a lot more hands-on activist work, but it's not what I feel like, oh, I want to do that. But I feel like that about research, especially since I have to do some kind of work like anyway. Yeah.
You can cooperate with activists.
Yeah, you do that, right? Yeah.
Other question? We still have, I think, like 5 or 10 minutes easily. So
I do have one, but Thibaut, you had one too,
Yeah.
so maybe you can
So
go first.
that was maybe just one related to like not the methodology, but what you said with the car, that the people still owns the car and then they had to pay for it. And in Belgium, but I guess in other cities and countries, we have something which is like a carpooling thing. So you have an app, just to come back a bit to the ICT stuff. You have an app which allows you to book a car. And then, so you pay like a fixed cost as well. And then you pay one cost which depends on how many kilometers you're doing, with the kind of car, like that kind of stuff. And so I do think that it could really influence the way people are using the car. Like doing it myself, I really saw something different in the way you are using, because you have to book. Sometimes it's not available. You have to also to do sometimes a few kilometers to get the car or that kind of stuff. And it's way more expensive. But so my first question would be, did you have any contact or discussion with such kind of businesses or people that are doing carpooling with ICT? That is the first question, and then I have another one.
So I personally did not, but there were other people in the projects that did. And that is the type of carpool that we saw could actually, like, if you sold your car and entered this kind of system, it led to you reducing your car travel, obviously. But I guess one of the conclusions that we really made was that if we want to have some kind of mobility service, which I haven't completely lost faith in, I just don't think that it can be focused on immediate access everywhere all the time, or be focused on, you know, a perfect optimized transport system. Because it also turned out that one of the reasons that car owners didn't take the car was when there was a traffic stocking, like problems with the car. So if it was all optimized so that you would always have flow in the traffic, then maybe they would never have incentives for that. But it was that if we can catch people kind of before they buy a car and get them to have those types of services before they have bought it, that can be an alternative. Yeah.
And the second one is maybe, I don't know if it's like just something that popped my mind, is if you are the businesses that run that company with the carpooling stuff, it's maybe a question a bit related to like rebound effect that you could have, saying like, okay, I pay this, if I can afford or not, I will do more kilometers. But I guess for the people that are running the company, the more you're driving, the better it is for them.
Yeah.
And so is there any way through ICT, or not ICT related completely, but is there any insight that you found in your work on doing that kind of things while really trying to reduce the distances, but so reduce how much the company is earning as well? I don't know if it's clear as a question.
Yeah, yes, it is, because it is one of the things that have come up. There is especially some mobility as a service research that has been done in Gothenburg, where they implemented mobility services, and I think they did it for people that moved to a new area and they didn't bring their car, I think, if I remember correctly. And then when they evaluated it, it actually turned out that from an environmental standpoint, it was very positive, because those people had like bought a subscription for traveling, and that they ended up not actually using. They didn't use their car as much as they thought they would, also because they moved to a new area, so they could build new habits after that. But the transport companies that had these carpools and so on, they were a bit displeased because they didn't sell as much travel as they had hoped for. So it's really a conflict of interests in trying to create these services. And I guess one of the reasons that mobility as a service hasn't really, when you say, oh, it should be like one platform where you can just plan and book for and pay for interlocked trips with different mobility types. You think like, oh, but that should exist, like, doesn't it? And it's sort of, maybe there have been pilots and so on, but it's never really taken off. And one of the reasons is that it's not good for competition. Yeah.
Anyone else?
So you talked about municipalities pushing money to shape their cities. If you were to give a recommendation to the Swedish municipality, to Stockholm, it's in Stockholm you were, right? Or whatever city you worked in. What is the first thing you would recommend, and what part would ICT play in it then?
I would recommend them to, okay. Wait, can I say something that's not technically the municipality, but that's a region? It doesn't really matter that much to you. It's like an administrative, yeah. It is to focus on robustness more than anything else, to try to create systems that work and don't crash and don't have a lot of bugs. And that would go for all types of digital investments, for infrastructure, for example, to avoid problems in public transport due to the digital systems, to try to avoid problems in healthcare due to digital systems crashing, to really focus on robustness of existing digital services before they do anything else. But I understand that they don't, that's not very sexy if you're trying to market your city as like the city of the future. So then they should be very kind of clear what their other money is for, and follow up if the things that they claim that these digital services will do actually happen, or if they just sound good or look cool. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, maybe a last one, and then we will go to the next talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina, for this talk. I have a question which is related to your answer. So you said your work, what you presented today was mainly based on what you did in your PhD. And I was wondering, so it's been 1.5 years. So have you succeeded to integrate this robustness concept, or the different keys you wanted to give to municipalities in your research right now, or do you face difficulties to build on that?
I would say partially yes, but at least for me, starting a postdoc is also about, a little bit exploring new areas. But I have brought some things with me. For example, that no matter how good your digital infrastructure is, your physical infrastructure also needs to be good enough and stable and so on. And as I said, like, the digital systems need to be good, and they can't be complicated and require a lot of problems. And that's so currently, like, one of the things that I'm working on is flexible public charging of electric cars, because we have a big growth of electric cars in Sweden, and that means that more and more people want to charge them, of course at home, but also in public. And that often happens at public parking spaces that are owned by the municipality. And a lot of municipalities have this far been providing electricity to charge your car with for free, but they cannot really legally do that because it undermines the kind of incentives for companies to build their own infrastructure and so on. And one of the first things that we said was, like, we cannot require new applications to be downloaded every time you want to charge your car. Like, it has to work at the application that you're already using for parking, like for paying for the parking at of your car, for example, because that's an application that people already know, and they are already frustrated at having to download new applications for their car charging all the time. So that's one way that we brought that with us, and to already be a bit prepared that a lot of the problems that people would say would have to do with the physical infrastructure of charging rather than the digital.
Cool, thank you. I think all good things comes to an end. So we will, we can give her an applause. Yeah.